Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Jonasz Rybicki. Russia continues its relentless campaign of attacks on Ukraine's civilian population, despite Donald Trump's efforts to bring the war to an end. At the same time, intense negotiations are still underway on the long-awaited mineral deal with Ukraine. So, will Ukraine's future become anchored to the economic might of America? And can this be achieved without hard security guarantees? And will Trump see through Russia's increasingly transparent attempts at stalling the ceasefire talks? Joining me now is Bohdan Nahaylo, editor-in-chief at Ukraine's leading English-language newspaper, the Kyiv Post, a respected author specializing in human rights and foreign affairs. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning.
So let's begin with the mineral deal, actually. There have been leaks, there have been controversies. Where do you think are we heading with this one?
We're still at an impasse. The Americans are, or rather the White House, is at pains to make it appear that a deal is very close. The Ukrainians are very unhappy with the revised terms of already a very, shall we say, unfair proposal as far as this deal was concerned. The latest is that the Ukrainians, having made their concerns known and having said from high-ranking officials that Ukraine will not, in effect, capitulate to economic exploitation and domination in a colonial manner by the Americans, even though Ukraine is so dependent on military and financial aid from the US. And as a result, the compromise is that the appearance of further negotiations is being made. A delegation is going to Washington, but by no means have the terms, the new terms, been firmed up. I was told as late as last Friday that no delegation was going. Suddenly something happened over the weekend. It's not the highest level delegation. It's not led by, for example, the head of the President Zelensky's administration, Mr. Yermak, who would normally be dealing with these sorts of things. So we're going through the motions, but at the same time, I think a deal on the terms that the Americans have been proposing in most recent weeks is unacceptable for Kyiv.
Do you think the US administration can still accept some sort of compromise? On the other hand, what's in it for Ukraine? To what extent do you think Ukraine actually may benefit from that in the way that the Americans are suggesting? i.e., if our business interests are here, then this alone guarantees, to some extent, your future security.
Well, on the surface, it seems to make some sense, of course, but the reality is that the kind of terms that are being proposed smack of 19th century colonialism, Ukraine giving, in effect, control over its natural resources, much of its economy to a friendly state, which is in effect treating Ukraine not as a friend or a de facto ally, but as a debtor, a client debtor, which needs to repay loans. That is the military support that's being given to Ukraine. And look at the double standards. Netanyahu, the prime minister of Israel, has just been in Washington. Is Washington demanding that Israel repay for all the years that America has so strongly supported Israel? No. Is it demanding the same from South Korea or from Taiwan, for example? So why the double standards and why is Ukraine targeted?
Do you think that this could actually be just the beginning of a broader trend? I mean, Trump recently suggested that Europe owes him for the years of what he perceives as trade injustice. So perhaps it might be that other countries are still awaiting their bill from the US.
Yes, but the difference is that Ukraine
I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm just, acknowledging that this is what
No.
Trump could be thinking about.
Yes, that might be the general pattern if he can get away with it. If he can get away with it, and Europe is standing firmer and firmer, so he may not just have it all his own way. But the difference is that Ukraine is at war, 3+ years of war. and is being targeted very heavily, particularly as we've seen in recent days. So
Also,
it's not as
10%
if,
tariffs on Ukraine, but not on Russia.
well, exactly. This is totally one-sided. And look, the argument is very specious. You know that America didn't impose tariffs on Russia because there's a peace process underway. They're negotiating with the Russians. So what does that mean? Is Ukraine not part of some kind of peace deal? Is it simply Washington and Moscow that's deciding everything, which the Ukrainians have long suspected?
So is Trump likely to see through what Putin is doing? Because they are giving Putin many incentives. Putin just keeps ignoring it. He keeps bringing new demands, at the same time breaking the terms of the partial ceasefire that was agreed before that.
Well, the ceasefire has remained on paper, as we know. The Russians have continued targeting energy infrastructure in Ukraine. But more recently, they've also fired rockets from the Black Sea. The Black Sea was supposed to have been militarily neutralized for the moment. That was perhaps the only tangible, it seemed, deal made in recent negotiations in Saudi Arabia. So the Russians are making a mockery of Trump's peacemaking efforts. Trump is desperate to show that he's producing some results and that he can deliver. But the Russians are rubbing it in his face and basically saying, we'll do what we want to do at our own pace. And, you can say what you want, but we'll continue this war. We'll try to grab as much more land, destroy as much more of Ukraine as we can in the meantime before perhaps some kind of compromise is reached.
What do you think is the more likely outcome right now? Trump blaming Ukraine, for example, using a potential failure of the negotiations on the minerals deal for the failure of the process itself, or Trump ramping up efforts to help Ukraine because he will see that Russia is basically not a credible negotiating partner. Which of these is more likely?
Well, Trump is a highly unpredictable creature. We don't know how he's going to react to Russian stubbornness, intransigence, and the fact that they're ignoring de facto his efforts to be seen as a potential Nobel Peace Prize winner. So, he's hurt by that, and probably these last very severe attacks on Ukraine, on Kryvyi Rih, on Kharkiv, on Kyiv at the weekend, again make him pause and think about his own image, not only international, but at home. He's under severe pressure from his domestic constituencies, even those who voted for him, getting very rapidly discouraged and even, shall we say, shocked by his methods, both at home and vis-a-vis the external world. And so he's got to somehow save face, look good, and come across as tough. He wanted to look tough. He promised that in 24 hours he would solve the Ukrainian-Russian war. We're, I don't know how many weeks after his inauguration, and we're not getting anywhere, just concessions to the Russians constantly, and kind of one-sided traffic in the peace process. So right now, probably he's under some pressure from his own advisors to salvage the situation and to look a little bit firmer, stricter with Putin. But on the other hand, he's being very stubborn. He's not conceding that he's failed. He's calling the war and Russian bombing horrible, but not acting upon it. If he were to act upon it now, immediately, perhaps that would force Putin to also take Trump's statements and gestures seriously.
So looking for a moment at the situation in the Middle East, we can see that Trump, if he sees that the use of military force or military support is expedient, he does that. Apparently, the cost of the operations against the Houthis was about $1 billion US. So that's not something that's, easily dismissed as just a minor operation. Could this be an indication that, if necessary, Trump might bring more aid to Ukraine? For example, for starters, more air defense systems, which President Zelensky has requested.
Well, look, in March, Trump suggested that Ukraine could be helped by finding Patriot missile systems in Europe and that he would facilitate this. We haven't really seen much happen there. On the other hand, he's redeploying Patriot missiles from South Korea to the Middle East. He's not doing that for Ukraine yet, although probably he's under some pressure from his advisors, given what we've seen over the last week, the horrific, deadly attacks in the air. But also the latest developments have shown that even the Patriot missiles have their weaknesses. Several of the ballistic missiles that Russia fired got through. And the question is now not just Patriot missile defense systems, but how many of them to be effective to, shall we say, go back to what Ukraine was asking for, pleading for in 2022, close the sky at least. You know, if you want to negotiate for peace, then at least close the sky and open up the Black Sea, those two elements.
And also long-range missiles. I mean, even if we accept that these long-range missiles would not be used against energy infrastructure in Russia, because this is apparently the part of the ceasefire that holds, Ukraine is keeping its part of the deal. It's not really attacking any refineries. Could still use long-range missiles to take out launch sites for Russian missiles or airfields where Russian bombers are present. But still, you know, coming back to the peace process as such, can you actually see any options being left for Europe here? We have a coalition of the willing, but it's more about the peacekeepers that would be present in Ukraine once a peace is reached. What about helping Ukraine further? For example, by giving it the type of weapons that the US will not, for the time being?
Well, hopefully that's the next stage. It's very important that Europe has galvanized itself and that we have this coalition of the willing and that Macron and the British Prime Minister are in the lead. We're awaiting the new government and the new Chancellor in Germany to join them alongside with Poland, the Baltic states, the Scandinavian states. The potential is there, the setup is there. Now we need to sort of move from words to action, you know, delivery as it were. But I think that is very important. If Europe simply remained passive, even in the sense of the talk about and moves to organize help. If they weren't there, I think this would allow Trump to get away with his own particular vision of how things should be done. That is, you know, a peace settlement on terms favorable to Russia, imposed on Ukraine, with Ukraine as a victim, and with perhaps America also literally cashing in on the deal that's made.
After all, we had indications that, for example, Nord Stream 2 could be actually on the cards, but that is another matter altogether, possibly something that we could discuss at a later stage. For the time being, Bohdan Nahaylo was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us, for sharing your insight. And I'm Jonasz Lewiński. You're watching TVP World. Please stay with us for more latest news and updates.